Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Happy New Year, and welcome to our second annual Law School MLK Convocation. We're really pleased to have a wonderful panel of judges and our own expert on law and leadership here, Dean Jenkins. But on behalf of the Diversity Committee, I really want to thank everyone for coming today and for being a part of an ongoing conversation here at the law school about the opportunities that the law presents and the legal profession has to make change in the world, and especially when times are both full of opportunity and challenge. There are lots of lessons that we can take from those who have had to continually ask themselves, where do we go from here in the course of a movement, whether that change that you're seeking is small or large scale. I think it's really an honor to have with us today two of our own alumni, Judge Davis and Judge Starr, who come with very different experiences and different, perhaps, generational takes on law and leadership at difficult times. But we're really glad that they are bringing their experience here with us today. I also want to note that on behalf of the Diversity Committee, we don't want this to just be a one-time conversation. This is something that needs to continue, whether it's in your classrooms, in the hallways, in the events, debates, and other presentations that you might be planning in your student organizations. We invite staff, faculty, and students to let us know what kind of programming you want to see, and we will be letting the community know about opportunities to support that continuing conversation. So with that, I am very pleased to hand the conversation over to Dean Gary Jenkins for our second annual MLK Convocation. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Dean Keyes, and thank you all for coming. And let me add my words of welcome, and I'm so pleased to see you all here. So first off, before we begin, I just want to say and note that this event was organized by our Diversity Committee. And of course, I want to thank them. That committee is chaired by Dean Keyes, but it also includes faculty and staff and students, and they've worked really hard on this event and lots of other things to help enrich our community and to focus on diversity and inclusion. You know, the committee's mission is really to foster a welcoming environment for future lawyers from all backgrounds, and to ensure that all of our graduates are equipped to effectively serve a diverse client base and to serve diverse communities. And when I think about that mission, I think about the many exchanges that I have as dean, including many conversations with general counsels in particular of organizations. And I think that the mission of our committee really reflects what's on really the front of mind for most major organizations today. I ask them, what's important to them, particularly when they think about hiring. And one of the things that consistently comes up in those discussions is a refrain about the importance of hiring a diverse staff, of course, to their workforce, but also making sure that everyone that they hire is really equipped and to effectively interact and lead diverse teams. And that's really something that organizations are finding a critical component to their success. So the work that our committee does that helps equip all of our students to interact and to lead and work with diverse teams is critically important. So with that, can we just give another round of applause for the whole committee and thank them for their work. So in today's conversation, we're bringing together the law school community to explore connections between law and justice, connections between law and leadership, and as Dean Keyes indicated, our theme for this conversation is where do we go from here, law and leadership in a fractured era. And we borrowed that title, particularly the front part of that title, from Dr. King. In 1967, he wrote his final book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And that work highlights the accomplishments of the civil rights movement, but also identifies profound challenges, continuing challenges. At that time, he wrote a lot about the North, in particular, where segregation was not legally enforced and entrenched in the same way that it was in the South, but of course, systematic inequalities that existed in education, economic, health, other disparities were really at the forefront of that work. He gave a speech of the same name that year to the Southern Christian Leadership Council that reflected on 10 years of progress, but highlighted the continued need for work ahead. So today, 50 years later, I think we can continue to reflect on accomplishments in law and policy in society that promote justice and access, but also we can remain alert to the inequities that remain, whether they be education disparities, inequities in economic mobility and housing, the needs of immigrant groups, and we can still ask the question, where do we go from here? We can ask, even if law and much of culture, although not all, prohibits explicit discrimination, should law and society also reach the elusive but also powerful forms of discrimination that continue to be problematic? Certainly systemic, implicit bias might be some examples that we can talk about. We can also ask questions about the persistent inequities that exist in, say, arrest rates or charging decisions or plea offers, et cetera, that face people of color in our criminal justice systems. We can ask questions about new technologies that are emerging, that are, of course, enabling broad connections, but are they also entrenching divisions in certain ways that might be problematic? We can ask how big data, for example, how do we use that to improve our lives, but also is it a civil rights issue or a civil rights problem? And we can ask, what role do lawyers play? And I think for generations, lawyers have been leaders. Lawyers have been viewed as leaders, certainly, of course, on civil rights issues. I grew up in a house where civil rights lawyers were among the superheroes, the real-world superheroes of life. And that's very much a story of leadership, and our profession has played an important role in fractured times. And I think that judges have a particularly unique perspective on lawyer leaders in and out of the courts. And to help us with this question of where do we go from here, we have two distinguished judges, both of whom are well known in our community. They are graduates of this law school, and both of whom I'm very pleased to welcome home as our alums. First, we have Senior Judge Michael Davis, class of '72 of the U.S. District Court for the District of Minnesota. He was the first African-American judge appointed to the district in 1994, and in 2008 he became the chief judge. Judge Davis has handled many high-profile and complex cases, of course. In 1999, Chief Justice Rehnquist appointed Judge Davis to the United States Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court for a 7-year term. As chief judge, he was instrumental in forming the Pro Se Project with the Minnesota chapter of the Federal Bar Association to provide civil pro se litigants with free attorneys. And prior to his 21 years on the federal bench, he worked at the Legal Rights Center, the Minneapolis Commission on Civil Rights, the Hennepin County Public Defender's Office, and was a state court judge in Hennepin County for 11 years. And this past fall, the Federal Bar Association honored him with the Sarah T. Hughes Civil Rights Award for his lifelong commitment to and pursuit of equal access and equal justice for all. And also joining us is Judge Nicole Starr, class of '03, a judge in the state's 2nd Judicial District, serving St. Paul and Ramsey County. She was appointed by Governor Dayton in 2014. Prior to her judgeship, she was an assistant public defender and of counsel at Helmuth & Johnson, a law firm in Edina. She also clerked for the Minnesota 4th Judicial District and on the Constitutional Court of South Africa. Judge Starr is a former president of the Minnesota Asian Pacific American Bar Association and a member of the Minnesota Lavender Bar Association. And she received the William E. Falvey Excellence Award for commitment and service to the indigent in Ramsey County. So please join me in welcoming our judges. So let me start with this question. Where do you see the kind of key areas in need for leadership in and among the legal profession? If you think about a leadership challenge, where do you see the legal profession play the role?
So in preparation for today, probably like most of the folks in this room, I read the speech with the same title, Where Do We Go From Here? And what struck me was when Reverend Martin Luther King said, your system needs to change. And he talked about this, a whole sort of revamping or rethinking of our systems and really taking a look at economic exploitation, racism, and militarism at the time. And so when I think about lawyers as leaders, I think about our unique ability as problem solvers and critical thinkers and communicators to really start thinking about, if you were to change systems, how would you do that? And so when you think about, when you ask the question, so where is there need for leadership? In many ways, the first place I would say is as thought leaders, or as people who are out in our communities sort of looking and seeing, well, what isn't working? What needs to be improved upon? And then start thinking about, as problem solvers and critical thinkers, what could we do? And so I think the first piece of the conversation is about taking the skills as a lawyer, when you learn how to think as a lawyer, and start applying them in your communities and where we came from, in our homes and in our hometowns.
Judge Davis?
If I could ask the audience, how many are third-year students? Second year? First year? All right. First-year students. All right. You are our leaders. Second-year students, you are our leaders. Third-year students, you are our leaders. No one can give you a title of being a leader. It's the ordinary person that does extraordinary things that makes this country great and this world great. No one would have thought back in 1972, 45 years ago, that I would have been on the federal bench, I would have been chief judge of this district, that I would have moved our district in a way to be more progressive. It was step by step. It was what I wanted to do in being a lawyer. And I was very fortunate to fall into the hands of a group of lawyers that were outstanding constitutional lawyers and were challenging the system to make it better. I'm on the board, I was on the board for Equal Justice Works, and I know that many of you know what that is, and I'm on some advisory board now there because of my name. But the individuals that are in the Equal Justice Works fellowship program have created programs, ideas to make the justice system better. One thing that I would ask you to do is to go back. We are going through the second founding of this country. We just had the 150th anniversary of the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, and then in 5 years, the 15th Amendment. Those amendments changed this country to make it whole. And we've been fighting as lawyers and as individuals in this country to make it a better place, to encompass everyone. From first, understand, 2 million Africans that were freed, then became citizens, then African males became able to vote. And then we've seen how the laws in the Supreme Court had narrowed and tried to vitiate the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments over the years. We've been fighting for social justice and equal access since the beginning of this republic. And just in the last 5 years, just think of the changes that have occurred dealing with gay rights. Just amazing how quickly things have changed. So my point, and I will hammer it all afternoon, is that you are leaders. You don't need me here. I've passed the torch to you. I'm an example of a young guy coming to this university, law school, getting a degree, working hard, and bit by bit changing the course of this state, hopefully, and this nation. And I know that each and every one of you will be doing that, and are doing it now.
Well, let's talk more about that. Let's talk about leadership, particularly leadership, what I call leadership without authority, right? That oftentimes we think of leadership from a hierarchical perspective, a top-down perspective, a command-control perspective. But of course, there are lots of different models, different ways to exercise leadership, and exercise leadership when you're maybe not at the top of the organizational chart or the head of the table. How do you see that? How do you view that? What lessons from your own experiences might you think about that might be relevant to leading without authority?
So I want to sort of answer your question and also sort of draw a slight distinction with Judge Davis. So my thought is, and I agree that you're absolutely, we are in a room full of leaders, but my thought would be to really think about, when you're thinking about history, instead of thinking about excellence and individuals, start thinking of excellence in terms of historical trends and historical movements, and really kind of think about, in terms of your own leadership, how that would look. And by that I mean, we just came out of 8 years of an African American president in an election that really brought to head some kind of hard rifts in our world. And we had somebody who who was an excellent person in terms of character, credentials. We may disagree about his policies and disagree about how the presidency looked, but in terms of personal values and authority, we had an example of excellence, and yet a system that hadn't fully changed sort of in the everyday ways and lives of people in the United States. And so the question for me is not necessarily, how do you lead without authority, but how do you lead in collaboration with others, and how do we build collaborations with each other and really start having hard conversations about the fact that maybe none of us are truly excellent, but all of us are excellent together. And it's sort of the Paul Wellstone idea of that we all do better when we all do better. He's a former senator in Minnesota. And really think about maybe leadership instead of a leader, leadership in terms of, a group of people or groups of people working together towards some sort of common ideas or ideas that make all of our lives more tolerable, more humane, more productive.
So starting from a collaborative frame as opposed to an individual framework.
Yes.
Judge Dix.
It's, as a lawyer, I can look back at the cases that have changed this country. It's one person without power, but has had an idea or had a client that had a cause that has changed this country. And that's what lawyers do. That's what ordinary people do, have changed our country. Because they have said, something's not right. And you, as a young lawyer, will say, yes, that's not right. And you will dig into it, and you will fight for it. You will lose, then you will win, then you will lose, then you will lose, then you will win, and you continue on until all of a sudden, bingo, you've won, and you've changed the system. Just with one case. Whether or not it's on the state level, federal level, or just in the community that you live. That is so important. And so, I guess when we talk about leadership, when you're admitted into law school, as far as I'm concerned, you are a leader. And that's why I keep on saying that. You are. And so people will look at you as a leader because you have a law degree. You have something that people honor and look up to, even though they may say bad things about attorneys, but who do they hire when they're in trouble? Right? They hire you. Or when they want something changed, they want you. And so it's innate in you because you're here. And especially for the first year students, I want you to keep that fire that you have that got you here to the law school, because they beat it out of you in the second and third years. And so that's the key. And when people come and see me and see some old guy, I'm almost 70, and I want young people around me because you are the ones that are giving me the energy to continue on the fight.
Was that your perspective when you were in their shoes? When you were young?
Well,
or is this lessons learned over time and in hindsight?
Well, it's lessons learned, but also, of course, I knew I was a leader. You don't get into law school without doing something in college that puts you on the forefront. And so, no, I understood that. Maybe I wasn't class president or whatever, but I knew that I was what I wanted was to do things that would help the world, whether or not it's on an international stage,
sure,
or then as I got into law school, it was on the local stage of helping poor people, African Americans and Native Americans, in the criminal justice system here.
Right. I'm going to tweak the question a little bit to you, Judge Starr, and ask about just your perspective on leadership. Has it changed? Has it evolved? Particularly being on the bench, has that changed it at all?
Yeah, I think so. So I came out of the YWCA of the USA. I was a student in that movement and spent a lot of time in college in rooms where it was all women leadership and often women of color who were the leaders in the room and the thinkers and the movers and the doers. And and really had a sense of, that sort of set my idea of how to be a leader. And there was a lot of talk, because again, the YWCA sort of has a Christian focus too, of being a servant leader and thinking about how do you lead from behind. And maybe there's something about that that's inherently gendered too, I don't know, and we probably don't have enough time to fully go into it, but a real thought about how do you move people when you're not in front, and how do you bring people together. Fast forward a little bit, when I was a public defender, for many of the same reasons as Judge Davis, you get a good sense of what it feels like to know injustice, even if it's not injustice that is brought upon yourself, but when you learn and sort of love your clients, you have a sense of what it means to truly live through unjust moments. And when I became a judge, the thing that I had to think about the hardest, or really struggle with and grapple with, was this idea of, now that I had the authority and the voice in the room, how do I think about that level of power and respect, and instead of replicating what I had seen and replicating some of the really, at times, very cruel and brutal sort of things that I saw in the court systems, how do you think about doing that work in a different way? And how do you think about authority in a way that isn't sort of crushing, but authority that really empowers people to think about and live up to expectations, but still hold them accountable when they fall short? And I know Judge Davis continues to say he's an old man or whatever. I look to Judge Davis, in fact, about the way he sentenced and the way publicly he thought about and really grappled with some of those big questions of humanity and thoughts about how do we do justice for people who have done wrong. And those are difficult questions as a leader or as a thought leader, and I am highly indebted to Judge Davis for the leadership he has shown on that front throughout his career. It's not only trailblazing, but it is truly thought-provoking and life-changing for many people.
So I hear, one of the things I hear in that, if we want to take break it down in some practical ways, is the use of role modeling and the importance of really having role models and applying that almost as a tool in which one can think about the ways they exercise leadership, is thinking about those that you admire and the way in which they've maneuvered similar situations or thought about certain things to be effective. Is that an approach that does that resonate with you? Am I reflecting back what you're saying?
It does. It does, and I would sort of add to this the way that we think about mentoring and mentorships, that you don't go to one person for all the things that you need. You go to the hardware store for a certain set of goods and items, and you go to the grocery store for something else. And when you think about role modeling, especially sort of going back to Dr. King, I just was on the interweb looking at some documents of letters that I think allegedly the FBI sent him or somebody sent him that were really quite terrible about some of his personal life. And I think when we think about role modeling, you get to pick and choose. You get to say, this is what I look to you for, and take people as both flawed humans and also incredibly, I guess, sort of to go against what I just said, incredibly exceptional, and not hold people to a standard across the board. So when you think about role models, one person can't fulfill all of that for us, and you really get, in terms of broad leadership, you get to pick and choose and put together the perfect role model.
Since we have Dr. King up, here is an ordinary person that turns out to be extraordinary. He was 25, 26, where he got his first small church. And he became a pastor, and the civil rights movement was percolating. People were upset about how they were being treated and wanted change. He didn't raise his hand and say, I am going to be your leader. The community chose him as a leader. And so, through my life, I've lived through the Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, impeachment of a president, two presidents, one president and resignation of another, assassination of a president, assassination of Dr. King and Malcolm X and Robert Kennedy. And with that and the chaos of the Civil Rights Movement, that in 1968, 69, there were over 1,000 cities that were burning because of insurrections and riots going on. And then we had the Vietnam War demonstrations. And something that you don't even recognize is that every night we saw body bags of young soldiers coming home. I was in law school, and I was drafted out of law school because we had the lottery. None of you have to think about military service unless you're in ROTC or you're going to go into Marine Corps. And so I've seen a lot, and so have you, in the course of your short career. And so, yes, people that I admire and saw that were doing good things became my role models. Starting at home, my mother. She's the one. But then, you talk about Dr. King, but if you want to talk about a lawyer, it's Thurgood Marshall. Hands down. You don't know anything about him. They don't teach you anything about him in law school. He's the greatest lawyer of the 20th century. He changed this country. And what he did, when I read what he did, I couldn't do it. I cry. That I couldn't do what he did. Because I'm not strong enough. And so I try to get stronger so I can be like Thurgood. When I was in law school, there was a ponytailed lawyer by the name of Doug Hall. And he was a civil rights lawyer in Minneapolis. And you whispered his name. And I was very fortunate to get an internship from the university to work with the Legal Rights Center and Doug Hall, Jim Krieger, Dave Murrin. And that changed my life because I was working with lawyers that were so important in changing of our justice system.
So we're going to open it up to questions, and we're going to get more in. But I do want to ask this. We're certainly in a period of great national and global change. Judge Starr, you alluded to the election that's recently occurred that I think it's fair to describe as divisive, if nothing else. And the subtitle of the Dr. King's book that we borrowed was Chaos or Community. So I guess my question for you is to now kind of look forward and look to what's happening in society. And I guess I want to ask, what's the future for us? Is it chaos? Is it community? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? and maybe, well, maybe I'll leave it at that. So, chaos or community? That's an easy one.
Is this a lawyer response if I say neither or both? When you think about the way that our communities sort of look and work, how could you not think that we always live in some level of chaos and some level of just simply the messiness of human lives? And that messiness, that uniqueness really is what brings us together. And so we come together because we have ideas or things we want to change. There's a problem we want to solve. We come together over that. We come together over being Asian or being part of the LGBT community. We come together for all sorts of reasons, but it's never clean. I mean, anyone who's ever been in an organization has seen, the infighting, the constant, the ideas exchanged, the coming together, the falling apart, and so certainly the control freak in me would say, I'd love a community that is, easy to understand, neat and clean, but the lived experience just simply isn't like that. And from all of that chaos, I mean, when you sort of think back through some of the times that Judge Davis brought up, like from that chaos comes incredible moments of community and it's sort of this gelling of ideas and people coming together. And it really is the chaos that makes people think, what do we have in common? Where do we go from here together? Because I don't think we naturally want to live in chaos, and that's why we do seek out community. So I think they work together well. Myself, I'm optimistic. When I was preparing for today's speech or today's conversation, a glance at history reminds us that this isn't new, this isn't unique. It's new and unique to some of us who've never lived through some of the big moments in history, but our commitment to sort of the core goals of the United States, the core constitutional truths, has carried us through time and time again and brought us together time and time again. And so it certainly feels unsettling for some of us who haven't lived through some of the other unsettling historical moments. But our history shows us that out of those unsettling moments come ordinary people who do extraordinary things and bring us and move us into simply more thoughtful and a better place.
Without chaos, we're not going to have progress. That's brings about change. And when has this country, everyone talks about, we want to go back to the 50s where everything was nice and neat. Okay, women were in the house, right? You want to go back there? The man brought home all the money. And as a kid, we had drills dealing with the atomic bomb, and I had to
duck and cover, right?
Duck and cover under the table. I use history as my strength. How could Abraham Lincoln do what he did when the country was pulled apart? And he was trying to bring it back together. How could Woodrow Wilson deal with World War I? How could FDR deal with the Great Depression? And then World War II. How could Lyndon Johnson deal with the assassination of the president and then come forth through the urging and prodding of ordinary people from being a Southerner to becoming an American and changing the course of history with the 1964 Civil Rights Bill law and the 1965 Voting Rights Bill. Then in such a short period of time, being engulfed by the Vietnam War and not being able to run in 1968. This country was at crossroads when President Nixon wouldn't turn over the tapes. It was a constitutional crisis that we had never seen. So it's delightful that we now tweet, right? Where are we going to go with that? I don't know. But I know that you are leaders and you're going to continue the struggle for what you feel is the way this country should go. Whether or not you're conservative or progressive or liberal or whatever. And that's what you're going to be fighting for. And for some odd reason, this country, other than any other country in the world, that stayed together dealing with all these problems. And so I am extremely hopeful because my generation screwed up, and I know that you won't follow in our footsteps. But you will make sure that things will continue to be open, progressive, and hopefully we'll be solving the problem of poverty, not only in this country, but around the world. Because we're all going to have to live together. We can't be isolated.
So let's bring more voices into this conversation. Let's hear from you, your comments, your questions.
I gotta wait for a mic to try to speak.
Wait.
My question is, there's some talk about leadership, and of course, you mentioned Thurgood Marshall and, some of the great civil rights leaders. As lawyers, what can we all do as lawyers? Maybe, like you said, you don't have the strength to be a Thurgood Marshall, but what is something, every lawyer can do to be a leader? Whether it's, pro bono hours, being a leader in their firm. Like, what are some examples that every lawyer would be able to do to be a leader?
One of the things that you're learning in law school is your profession is so broad, and it's one of helping people. And I can't think of one senior partner in a large law firm that does not give a tremendous amount of hours back to pro bono work, helping out the community, whether or not it's your church, your mosque, or your synagogue, or whatever religion you're attached to, or working with people that have been abused either by their partner or by other people, or just going into the schools. You are a leader. How many African American boys have never seen a lawyer? That's the key. Even now, our district, we have a community outreach. We have lawyers going into the Minneapolis, Bloomington, and St. Paul school systems, telling our stories and giving hope to people that don't have hope. Showing them that there is a way. And so that's what I'm saying. You walk out and you tell somebody in the community, our community, that you're in law school, oh my goodness, you know that. Shake your hand. Keep it up. And so that's what I'm telling you. Being a lawyer is a special profession and a special obligation to make sure that the world is better, that this country is better, this community is better, and wherever you live is better. That's your obligation. And yes, I went the poverty route, but I can tell you, I have worked with so many partners and associates in law firms that give so many hours back to the community, doing creative work to help people, to help organizations. It's just amazing.
And I also think that we think of, oftentimes we think you have to choose a path. You have to do one thing, or you're in the private sector, you're in the public sector. You're one or the other. And I think that now more than ever, those lines are blurring, that to actually be a more effective leader, if you've got a background and you've got experience, you spent time in the private sector, you spent time in government, you spent time in the nonprofit sector, and you can make those connections and cross-border and spend different points in your career and move back and forth, actually, I think gives you more power, gives you more possibilities. And we can, I think oftentimes we hem ourselves into boxes as thinking like, oh, that's for this type of person or this other type of person. This is the only way in which you can do pro bono work or public interest work or something. And I think we need to really continually open up our minds to all types of different ways in which we can experience those things and develop as leaders.
I would just add to this too, and sort of on a slightly different route, because Judge Davis has said so eloquently one possible option. Let me give another option for folks to think about. In 2000, this last year, Oxford Dictionary said that the word of the year, the new word, was post-truth, meaning we are sort of beyond truth. And you are some of the most highly educated members of our communities. And with the privilege of being a lawyer in our communities comes the responsibility, and to sort of add to the civic responsibility of being out and volunteering, you have a civic obligation to bring truth and knowledge into our everyday conversations. You've been educated and trained to think about truth and to think about knowledge, to sift through lots of information, to consolidate it in easy and accessible ways. And as thought leaders in our communities, as people who are highly educated, you have an obligation, in my mind, as leaders, to go out and to use your thought in the public square. And maybe it's through volunteering, but maybe it's through being civically engaged in conversation and in discourse, and forcing people to come to a level where post-truth isn't going to be our word or the way we think and operate in the world. And you are most uniquely situated to do that.
Hi there. Thank you all so much for your time. My question, leaders have to not only imagine ways that the future can be and visionary change, but also have to bring people together and build consensus. How do you know when it's time to compromise versus when it's time to push for more change?
Compromise.
Dean, help us out.
Well, I think like anything, you want to think about what are your let's not confuse ends and means. So I think that oftentimes when you think about the ends, you want to have a clear vision about what the ends are, what success is, and I think about means. You might want to be a little more flexible. You might want to be willing to compromise about how you get there. So I think that that's an important distinction that I would start with. So if you're really thinking about, justice, equality for a certain place, no, I might not be willing to compromise on that, right? That's the goal. But how we get there, the steps that we take to get there, what are the intermediate steps? You might be more flexible and look for points of consensus that might provide intermediate wins and move you a step further along. I think that...
But understanding that the principle you are always with, by compromising, you're not giving up that principle. Mm-hmm. You may use that compromise to make that step. Right. Mm-hmm. But so often people forget why they're doing something. Mm-hmm. They forget the principle. And they're involved in just the compromise. And, we have to compromise, we have to compromise, we have to compromise. Understand, slavery would never have been abolished. The Quakers were castigated. They were the worst possible, the small group of people wanting to change the English society. And they wouldn't compromise because slavery was wrong. And so that's what you have to keep in mind. That yes, you may, as a politician or as a lawyer, you'll compromise, but you can't give up the principle. If you give up the principle, then as far as I'm concerned, you're not doing any good for your client or for you or the community.
Do you have another question? Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm gonna take this opportunity to wrap up. I will just say that hope came up a couple of times in our discussion, and I asked that question about optimism or pessimism. And, and I just want to say that when I think of Dr. King, one of the things that I think of is he's really one of our culture's great philosophers of hope, right? That was such an important part of his message, but it was one that was both aspirational, but also about impact, right? About action. Right, holding hope, but at the same time rejecting being passive, or it wasn't just magical thinking; it was turning hope into action. And I think that if we continue to hold that as a model, we have opportunities to continually move forward and find ways to find community and to be impactful and to make a difference. And there's a great quote that I found that I'm just going to end with, that we must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope, from Dr. King. So with that, we'll end. I think... Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our guests. And I think Dean Keyes is just going to make a brief announcement before we close out.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. So for those of you who want to pick up that torch and keep carrying it forward, and we hope that you will. There's a lot of different ways to do that here at the law school. We have very active student organizations. If you or an organization you're a part of has an idea, we want to invite you to a new opportunity that we're going to be promoting, which is Where Do We Go From Here series. And that basically will provide some supplemental funding to anything you might get from Law Council to decide what the current issues of the day or solutions might be, and how you can lead towards those solutions in lots of different areas, whether that's IP or GLBT rights or divisions between political parties. Whatever issues you see as being areas that need change or problem solving, bring your ideas to the table. We're going to be sending around information to give you more information, and we hope that you'll get involved. Another thing that I want to plug really quickly is that this coming Saturday is the MLK Day of Service. Many of you are already probably signed up. If you are not, I believe there are still placements available, so get out into the community, and want to thank the Law Council for helping organize that initiative. If you have other ideas, please share them with the Diversity Committee and with each other, and keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for the conversation and for your engagement today. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank you.